Hey guys, I know this isn't really a normal video. This is like a weird interview thing I did. So it's not really going to be funny. Even the rest of my videos aren't funny. So that's just a heads up before we start the video. And let's just try and get into days in the National Guard.
I do.
What were they like?
Well, I joined the National Guard and it was maybe February or March of 1964, and I didn't leave for active duty until August of 1964, which was at Fort Knox, Kentucky. So I went to meetings once a month before I ever actually went on active duty. But I don't remember much about my first day at the meetings, but I remember my first day on that train, a bunch of us on a train to Fort Knox.
What was it like on the train?
That was a long, hot ride.
Oh.
Yeah, hanging out of the coaches between the cars, trying to cool off. And it was hot in Fort Knox in August, believe me.
What was Fort Knox like?
Well, Fort Knox was an armor center where they trained people to shoot and run tanks.
Yeah.
Also an infantry school, and I was in the infantry school, so we would we had physical training, go out and run. And then you'd hear a big rumble behind you, and here comes a tank down the road, so everybody hit the ditch. Try to get out of the way so you wouldn't get run over. Because these guys were driving the tanks, they were learning, they were doing this.
Did you ever drive a tank?
No,
Oh.
no. All I did was a lot of physical training.
Did you ever drive? Oh, so you didn't drive any armored vehicles or anything?
No.
Okay. What were the places that you traveled? You said that you went to Kentucky. Was there any?
I was in Kentucky for 8 weeks of basic training, infantry school, and we had to learn a lot of physical training, PT they called it, every day up at about 5:30 in the morning, get outside, do all your jumping jacks and your daily dozen they called it, and then you ran for a mile, 2 miles before breakfast. Then you ate, and then you went out for your training for the day. And it could be to the rifle range, or to hand-to-hand combat, or bayonet training, first aid, tactical training. But I was there for 8 weeks, and then my next assignment wasn't ready yet, so I was held over for 2 weeks. And when you were a holdover, they treated you real well. It's like you were a real living person again instead of a grunt. And we did yard work and painted and things like that.
Yeah.
They kept us busy. And then I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia, 2 weeks later. So I was there for about 6 months, and training there in advanced skills.
How many hours of physical work do you think you put in each day?
Well, we had like I said, we had the early morning before breakfast daily dozen. We ran for probably another half hour. We ate, we got showered, we went through our day, and a lot of the day was marching, physical training, long runs, miles, people passing out
Oh boy.
in the ditches and stuff. Yeah, it was.
Did you ever pass out?
No,
Oh.
no, I get pretty hot, but they always had an ambulance that followed the
Good.
medical people followed the column whenever we were running, because you ran with backpacks on a lot of times and with all kind of gear.
Did you get any medals or awards?
When I was in basic training, there were, I think it was 5 skills you had to master. One was first aid training. So you were tested at the end of the cycle in first aid, marksmanship, PT, all your scores for PT. What was the other ones? I'm trying to think. Oh, hand-to-hand combat. And I forgot what the last one was. Was it a physical test, or not a physical test, but a mental exam? So they scored you in all 5 categories, and there were 200 and I think there were around 250 some men in our company that trained together. The E11-3, that was our designation. There were 250 guys, and I was the first one. I got the best score. I missed, in rifle you were either a marksman, which was average, a sharpshooter, which was much better, or an expert, which was the best. I missed expert by 2 shots. And then in physical training I had a high score. In everything I did really well, but I never won any one individual category. I was just up here, and I got trainee of the cycle.
You said that you did a hand-to-hand combat. Do you do any martial arts?
It was somewhat like, wasn't jujitsu, but it was more body manipulation. How, if somebody throws a punch, to grab them by the arm and put your hip into them, flip them over. Hand-to-hand combat also was bayonet training with a rifle and a bayonet on the end, and you learned all the moves to parry and thrust and hit the guy with the butt rifle and all that kind of stuff. I think I could still do that. It was... Yeah.
Could you recall any times you were afraid?
Only when those tanks would come down the road behind us when we were running. That's the things that I would... when I saw that tank doing this, I said, oh, bail. No, I can't remember any time that I was actually afraid. Tired.
Did you have any friends in the military?
Oh, yeah. Our company, I told you earlier about National Guard. I was in the National Guard, and so was everybody else in my company. All 250 guys were from practically any state you can imagine. And I had some good friends. A couple were from Pennsylvania, eastern Pennsylvania. I had a very good friend from Virginia that I hung out with when we had time off. Texas, a teacher from Texas that I befriended, a teacher from Alabama, and the fellow from Virginia, and one from Minnesota. There was like 6 of us that when we had leave, we'd travel to the local sites. And
That's nice. What was your favorite memory from the military?
probably my friends, the friendships I made there was they were neat people, and it was interesting to meet people from all over the country in the same situation as you know.
Did any of your friends get shipped off?
No, not that I'm aware of. When I was in the National Guard, it wasn't customary for, as it is today, for reserve units and National Guard units to be sent into combat. What we ended up being was what was at the time considered a select reserve force, which meant that the National Guard and the enlisted reserves backed up the Army. And if they wanted to send more troops into a situation like Vietnam, they would activate reserve units or National Guard units and send them to places where regular Army troops normally were, like Germany. They're stationed in Germany, We almost went to Germany, but at the last minute they changed their mind. Or Korea, Japan. But at the time, no National Guard or Reserve troops were sent into battle. Now, in Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq, there's all kind of reserves and National Guard troops getting called up because the Army is much smaller and it's volunteer now. Back then they had so many men.
What's your favorite object that you've gotten from like a medal or something, or do you have like a special dog tag that a friend gave you? Or
I have mine. Everybody in the military wears dog tags. There's 2 of them.
to identify your body?
Yeah, you wear 2 of them around your neck on a chain, and you obviously have to learn that number because you would get stopped wherever you were. Some officer would say, "What's your service number?" And then you would have to say, in my case, NG 134, whatever that is there. I've forgotten. You notice the tag has NG in front of it. That's National Guard. If you were a 3-year enlistee, you had RA for regular Army in front of that number. If you were drafted, you had US and that number. And if you were an Army reservist, as opposed to National Guard, you had an ER for enlisted reserve. So there was 4 categories there.
What lessons did you learn from your time in the National Guard?
I think discipline more than anything, especially in during my 8.5 months that I was on active duty. There's some things that you don't want to do, but you have to do because that's your situation. So you learn to deal with it, and I think instead of being able to just say, I don't want to do this, you end up doing it because that's what you have to do. So I think it's a form of discipline.
What's your favorite story from being in the National Guard? Like, do you have any really good stories that you like to tell?
Yeah, one of the funniest ones, I think, and most of them were amusing. We were on our way up to New York for summer camp, and when we went, we always had to go in a convoy of trucks. And I always ended up driving the truck. And we were on our way up through northern Pennsylvania, and I think we were in New York, and we broke down.
Oh.
And a bunch of young guys in a truck, there was 2 of us, and then they always had a wrecker, a tow truck that followed the convoy for breakdowns. So we pulled over to the side of the road and looked over, and here comes this pretty girl. Oh, she was about 18. She came over and she started talking with us. She was flirting with us. And then we looked and said, "You live there?" And she said, "Yeah, my father runs that bar over there." So she brought us a cold beer. That was one of the funniest things that we broke down. It was hot, and there we were sitting there, break down right in front of a bar, talking to a pretty girl. And one time I laid down in a bunch of chiggers down in Virginia when I was down at Camp Pickett down there for summer camp. They were crawling all over me.
Oh.
Chiggers are like ticks.
What was the most exhausted you've ever been?
I think there were 2 hills in Kentucky that we used to train on. One was called Misery, and the other was Agony. And we had to do a 10-mile hike. And we had packs on, and we walked for I don't know how many miles it was, but we got to Misery and the first sergeant, who was he was a marathon runner, and Sergeant Quezada was his name. He was Hispanic. Sergeant Quezada, after we're walking for 7 or 8 miles and it's hot, he says, "Double time, hook." We're running up Misery, which was a pretty good hill. And we got to the top, and a couple of guys passed out on the side of the road. And then we walked on the other side, and then we got to Agony, and he did the same thing. And I think that's probably most exciting. It was like 10 miles that we walked and ran with these packs and stuff. That was probably the worst.
Did you suffer any serious injuries?
Yeah, actually, I don't know how serious it was, but it sure hobbled me. I ended up with a sprained ankle.
Oh.
I don't know how I did it, but it just got swollen, and it was really really bothering me, and I was limping. So they sent me to the infirmary, and they sent another guy with me, and doctor looked at it, and he said, "Well," he says, "I don't think there's anything wrong with it." And he says, "It's just a sprain." He said, "We'll put you on light duty for a while, and we'll wrap it." And I said, "Funny thing about it, Doc," I says, "it's this clicking sound when I move my foot." And he said, "Clicking sound?" So I moved my foot, and he said, "Oh, that's a different story." So he told this guy that's with me, he says, "I'm going to give him a shot in his ankle." He says, "Hold his foot down because this is going to hurt."
Jeez.
So this guy's holding my foot down. He put that shot in, and I never felt a thing. I said, "It didn't hurt." But I suffered with that for the rest of the time I was in, until about the last week or two. It was hard to walk and do the physical stuff. I managed to get through it. Because if you don't, they recycle you. Let's say you're in your 6th week and you can't go on because you had an injury. They'll hold you back and put you in the next class at the 6th week after you heal up, and then you got to go through it. Not start over, but.
What was the hardest routine exercise that you had to do?
Well, I think it was whenever you did something wrong and they made you get down and do push-ups.
How many?
Give me 20, give me 25. You're down there. And this is why you're physical training, so you're already tired, and then they're asking you, get down there and give them another 25. Oh, it's a funny story?
Yeah.
We had training, we were in formation, and we had rifles, new rifles, M14s. And we had new bayonets. And there was drills that you did, and your bayonet was in a sheath on the left side of your body, on your belt. And, like a knife in a sheath. And so you had your rifle, and they'd say, "Fix bayonets," as a drill. So you took your rifle, and you put it forward, and you reached here, and you took your bayonet out of the scabbard, and you put it on the rifle like that, and then you brought it back to your body like this. And whenever you were done, they'd say, "Okay, release bayonets," I think the command was. And so you would reach out here with this thing's sharp. You reach out here with your hand, and you would pull there's a little release button there, pull the bayonet out, put it back in your scabbard. Well, this one guy, he couldn't get his off.
Oh, no.
Because the rifle was new,
Yeah, so it
the
wasn't
bayonet was
broken
new,
in.
and it wasn't broken in, it wasn't worn in. So he went like this, and pulled it close, he went like this, and he stuck himself right here. So Sergeant Quezada was the one that was up there, and they had like a wooden platform, and he was up there, and all the rest of us were down here, right? And he grabs this guy, And he drags him up onto the stage, and blood's running down his face, and he says, "See what happened when you mess up and you don't follow orders, you hold it out here." And then, he was just berating this kid. Then they took him off to the infirmary to get fixed up, right? So we're going on, it's like the next day, we're going through the same thing. Fix bayonets. Put a bayonet on there. And he says, "All right, remove bayonets or release bayonets." Mine wouldn't come off.
Oh.
And you couldn't get any leverage out here, so to bring it in here, I stuck myself right there. Just a prick. I just stopped at people, and I thought, oh no.
No.
I was being an S, my last name Sisson being an S, I was in the back.
Yeah.
Of the A's, I was in the back in the 5th platoon because I was S, so I was in the back, and I being the tallest, almost in the whole platoon, I was in the back of the back. So nobody saw me except the guy next to me who was laughing. And I got it off, put it back in, and I went, no. But I stuck myself just like this guy did the day before.
Were there any really fun drills that you looked forward to, or were they?
I like the rifle range.
Oh.
Yeah, I had a good time on the rifle range. They had pop-up targets. They were metal, and they had, I think they were metal, but they had like bullseyes on, or they were shaped like silhouettes, like a upper body, shoulders, and a head. And you were in various positions. You shot from a prone position, laying down like this. You got into a foxhole and shot from there. You shot from cross-legged sitting positions, standing. And you had to qualify in all these different positions. But the targets were at like 50 yards, 100 yards, 150, 200, and they would pop up. Just, you didn't know which one was coming up next. 50 yards, bam, you shoot that one. 100 yards over there, And it was actually fun. And I got a lot of satisfaction out of shooting on the range, and I just always wished I'd have made expert, but I come pretty close.
Did you have like a favorite weapon to use?
No, the only thing that we used was the M14 at the time. That was the standard military weapon for semi-automatic. I did fire some pistols in the National Guard when I got back, but nothing. And M1s we had, which was an older model.
Do you keep in touch with any of your friends from the military?
No, the only ones that I did was somebody that lived in my National Guard unit was in Washington, Pennsylvania, down south there at the airport. And there was a couple of people from that area that I kept in touch with after the 6 years was up, but not anymore.
Did you ever meet anyone really important? Like, did you ever meet a president or?
No. Sergeant Quezada.
Did your sergeant go in any wars?
I don't know. I can imagine he was the kind of guy that would volunteer to go. I don't know that he ever did, but in fact, he might have been there before. I don't think so, before he trained us, but don't think so. I don't know of anybody from that unit that ever went overseas.
What was the food like there?
It really wasn't bad. It was basic, but I mean, a lot of carbs.
Yeah.
Because you're burning off tons of carbs with all that physical activity. So they gave you a lot of potatoes and bread and They fed you pretty well. You got 3 meals a day. And they were pretty hearty. But there wasn't anything else in between. I mean, it was, you ate and went back to the barracks and cleaned off all the mess that you made all day long, your boots and your weapon, tear it apart, clean it, put it back together, get ready to mess it up the next day.
Do you still have your M14?
No. That wasn't mine.
Uh,
I was a loner. My National Guard unit was an aviation unit, which was much different than most. A lot of the 28th Division it's an infantry division, the Pennsylvania National Guard, but there's support troops like engineers, aviation reconnaissance. We were out at the airport in Washington, Pennsylvania, and that's where I would go for my drills. But we had 4 fixed wing aircraft, and we had 3 helicopters.
Did you ever get to fly in any of them?
Oh yeah, I flew in a lot of them. That's what I went to school for. I have another picture here. When I left Fort Knox, which is where everybody went to, in this part of the country anyhow, they went to Fort Knox in the eastern part of the United States for basic training. Everybody had to go through that, but then once you got out of basic training, you had to learn some advanced skills, and it could have been anything depending on your unit. If you were in an infantry unit, you went to advanced infantry school and you learned how to fire machine guns and all those kind of things. If you were in an armored unit, you went to a school to learn how to probably stayed at Fort Knox. Or if you were in artillery, you went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma to learn your artillery school. I was in the Signal Corps, which is electronics and communications. So I went to Fort Gordon, which was the signal school for the Army, Southeastern Signal School. And I trained in aviation electronics. We repaired radios and the communications in the aircraft, helicopters, and fixed-wing aircraft. But my brother-in-law was a pilot in that unit too, so he had to keep his hours up, and that was my sister's husband, and so I got to fly a good bit. I'd go out with him, and he was a fixed-wing pilot.
I was meaning to ask you, what's this pin?
Oh, this was a pin that we wore in our unit.
Wing support?
Wing support, yeah. We were an observation support, aerial support for the infantry. And I ran across that. I was looking for some patches that I was going to give you, and I could not find them. I had Keystone patches and PFC, Corporal, Spec 4 patches, Sergeant. I did make Sergeant at one point.
Did you have a favorite patch or anything?
No, not particularly. Everybody knew that Keystone patch though when they saw that. I don't think it's on my uniform. No, couldn't see it. I don't know why I was the only one that had that kind of hat on, but I must have lost the other one. Did you see that?
No. Go, catch it, arms.
Yeah, I ran across these looking for the patches. They had some sew-on stuff. I know they're around here somewhere, but got in touch with a lot of junk in this house, though, I tell you that.
Is there anything you regret about being in the National Guard?
No, not really. That was a good experience, I think. I'm fortunate I never got called up for anything. I know we trained for the, when Martin Luther King was assassinated,
Oh.
there were riots in Pittsburgh. I don't know, you wouldn't know, but you may recall when you were younger, that was about 1967 or 8.
Yeah.
And there were riots, and they called out the National Guard into the city. And I know we reported to the Armory, and we did some riot training, but we stayed at the Armory. They never called us to go downtown. But that's the closest we got called up. But we don't get many floods or national. There's no earthquakes around here and that kind of stuff, you know.
Did you ever do any like simulation training, like a scrimmage, I guess you would call it, with another division or something?
At summer camp, we did some of that. Yeah, we'd go out and we'd bivouac out in the woods overnight, and there would be night training and with blanks, and people would try to infiltrate your perimeter and that kind of thing. Yeah, we did some of that simulated. It was always more fun to be the aggressor guy.
Yeah. Sounds.
We got to do that sometimes with another company being the defenders, and that was fun. When you didn't lay down with the chiggers.
How about any like life lessons that you learned from your time, or
You already asked that question.
did you? Oh, sorry.
I think just the discipline. I really think, in looking back on it and looking at today, that Israel does it differently. They require everybody to spend a portion of their life when they're young in the military, and that's for a different reason. But it's for defense, because it's a small country and they have a lot of enemies. But I really think that's not a bad. This is a big country. I don't know how you could accommodate every 18-year-old that came out of high school and say you got to spend a year in the military. But something equivalent to that might give them a little more discipline when it comes to trying to face the trials of life.
So you like drafts? Well, so you like? Do you have any opinions on the draft or anything?
I think as long as they can find volunteers, I don't think they need a draft.
Yeah.
At the time, there was no such thing as a volunteer army, and when I joined the National Guard, I think it depends on the times and the circumstances. Now they don't seem to have any trouble getting.
Yeah.
But they offer a lot of things in the military anymore. You can enlist in the military. You can spend your time there. When you get out, they'll pay for your education. You can learn skills that you can use on the outside. Now it's not going into the military doesn't mean you're just going to learn how to shoot a gun.
Wasn't that enacted in like World War II? Right after World War II, they enacted the paying for people's educations.
Yes. Yeah, and it's even more beneficial today. I mean, if I were a young person, I would seriously consider some kind of a military career. I know people that Mike Malloy's brother. He went to Arizona, Eastern Arizona State, and he was in ROTC. When he got out, he was a second lieutenant in the Army. He had an obligation of 5 or 6 years. He did go to Afghanistan. Wasn't injured anyway, but he spent 20 years in there, and he got out. He was 42 years old. He had a pension, and he got a job in private industry doing what he did in the military because it was kind of a specialty. What he learned was he was in a logistics command. In other words, you have 5,000 men here, and you want to move them there. You've got all the logistics to get all their equipment, everything from here to there. That's what he specialized in: shipping, containers, all those kind of things. And when he was done with his 20 years, he had all that experience doing it in the Army, and he got out and he got a great job in Colorado. Then he's now in Virginia, but it's a good chance to learn skills that are useful in.
I'm surprised I never asked you this question. How long were you in the National Guard exactly?
6 years was the obligation, yeah.